Hello, friends, and welcome back to Staying in My Lane podcast. If you're new, welcome, and if you're not, welcome back. I've been a little bit MIA lately for a good reason. I had twins, so it feels like the blink of an eye. I went from 3 kids to 5, and adjusting to that kind of life has been intense, beautiful, and exhausting, and honestly, a little chaotic. So I am back. If you want to hear my full birth story and everything that came along with it, go back and listen to the previous episode. But for this episode, I wanted to do something a little different. I thought it would be fun to, and honestly more personal, to step away from one specific topic today and open the floor to your questions, confessions, and things that a lot of people think about but are afraid to say out loud. So some of these came through email, DMs, and some through text. All of these are going to be anonymous, except I will know who said them, but I'm not going to share that. This matters to me because the one thing that I want to do with this podcast, the whole reason I created this podcast is because I wanted it to be a place people could come and be honest, no pretending, no perfect answers, just real conversations and, things that come with being a better human. So if you sent me something, thank you for trusting me. I never take that lightly, but let's go ahead and jump into it. The first question came to me through an email. And this question, I think as moms, we can all relate to this because, being a mom changes who you are. And sometimes we question how our lives would be different with or without our kids. Not saying that we don't want them, but we miss that freedom. The question is, I love my kids more than anything, but I miss my old life so much that it hurts. Does that make me a bad mom? And no, I don't think so. I think it's normal. And I think it's one of those things that, again, so many mothers feel. We don't want to ever admit that out loud because society is very ruthless and they judge. And, loving your children and missing your old life can exist at the same time. Those two things are not opposites. Missing freedom does not mean you love your children any less. It means that your life changed in a major way, and a part of you is grieving the version that you're yourself that I would say had more space and more freedom, more flexibility, and more independence. And I get that deeply. I understand. I have 5 children, especially right now after going from 3 to 5. I felt the weight of how much motherhood can completely reshape your daily life. And, there's a lot of moms who, you know, they work, they do all these things. And, when we were in our 20s, it was, we were responsible for us as individuals. And, I had my son when I was in my early 20s, and even going from 1 to 2 kids was a big adjustment for me. Everything takes more energy, it takes more planning. Even the little things like running errands or leaving the house feels different now. And when you're in a season like that, especially during maternity leave like me, when life can feel repetitive and isolating, it can take a toll on your mental health. And that's why we need to be talking about these things, because there is real grief that can come with motherhood. Not grief over your children, but grief over your old rhythm, your old freedom, your old identity. And the more honest that we are about that, the less shame that women will carry in silence, which again, you can even tie that back to postpartum depression and, finding your groove, finding who you are when you have a new baby. So no, missing your old life does not make you a bad mom. It makes you honest, it makes you self-aware, and it makes you human. And we're going to get into a little more conversation about self-awareness. So I'm really glad that came up. The next question, where is the line between being a good mom, doing everything for everyone else, and still making time for yourself without losing who you are? This was sent in to me by a girl that I have known for a very long time. And we had a really long conversation. And, I think this is one of the most important questions a mother can ask herself, because the truth is, a lot of women do lose themselves in motherhood. Not because they're weak, but because it's incredibly easy to become so consumed by everyone else's needs and everything else that you slowly disappear inside of your role. I don't think the answer is checking out of motherhood. I think that the answer is refusing to abandon yourself within it. It's very easy to lose yourself in the chaos. That line looks different for everyone, but in my opinion, It starts with recognizing that taking care of you is not selfish. It's necessary. You cannot pour from an empty cup, whether that looks like a face mask in a shower, shaving your legs and having 20 minutes of silence in the bathroom, running to grab a coffee and listening to a podcast, or just taking a power nap. Whatever it is, you owe it to yourself to have time for yourself, because that matters. And it matters not only for you, but for your children too. Because when your kids see that you care for yourself, they learn that self-care is normal and it's necessary. They learn that being overwhelmed does not mean you have to explode, shut down, or make everyone else responsible for your emotional state. They learn that taking care of yourself is part of being healthy. I think that we need to stop asking ourselves what we can do for other people all the time. And I think we should take more time to reflect on what we can do for ourselves so that we can show up for other people. I think that we should stop acting like we have to erase who we are to be a good mom, because that's simply not true. You can be a good mother and still protect your identity. You can be committed to your family and still need a break. You can love your children deeply and still need space. Those things can all coexist together. This next question is a little spicier, and I think that it needs to be more common, because I think that these are conversations, again, that we don't feel comfortable having because society tells us that it's wrong. So the question is, my partner wants sex way more than I do since having kids. Sometimes I fake being asleep or being sick to avoid it. Is that normal? And what can I do to change that dynamic in my marriage? And my first response is that I think this is much more common than people want to admit. After having kids, so much changes physically, emotionally, hormonally, mentally. Moms are tired, overstimulated, touched out, and often carrying an enormous mental load. Dads too. So yes, it makes much more sense that intimacy can feel very different in that season of life. At the same time, I think that personally, physical intimacy matters in a relationship, not because anyone is owed sex. It's not an obligation to have sex, but it should come from physical connection being deeply tied to emotional connection. And when couples feel desired, wanted, emotionally connected, all of that, that will often lead to the strengthening of the relationship as a whole. However, the real issue here is not whether you should want to have sex or whether you should have sex. The real issue here is understanding why you don't want it right now. Are you exhausted? Is it hormones? Is it resentment, body image, emotional disconnection? Is it the feeling that you're needed by everyone all day and you have nothing left to give? That's where the conversation really needs to start. Instead of avoiding the issue silently, pulling away, or, pushing away, I guess, either or. I think the healthiest thing that we can do is to be honest with ourselves and talk about what's changed. Sit down and have a conversation with your husband. That's something that my husband and I do often, almost daily, or at least weekly. Sitting down and having conversations without judgment, without any resentment, without any, I guess, rules, if you will, besides the fact that we're sitting down to both be honest. Talk about what you guys both need. Talk about what's changed. Talk about, what you want. Maybe the answer is not immediately fixing the sex life. Maybe it's rebuilding emotional closeness first. Maybe it's more affection, more safety, more intentional time together, more understanding of each other's needs, and more patience with each other. I do believe that intimacy in a relationship is important, and I think it is necessary as well. But I think that it has to be built on communication, mutual care, not guilt and avoidance. So, good luck, friend. Moving on to the next question. And I'm going to just remind everybody that this is also not a place where we are going to judge. So, I just want to preface that first before I dive into this question. Okay, so here we go. I love my partner, but lately I've caught myself fantasizing about my ex. Not because I want to cheat, but because I miss the feeling of being wanted more than just being a mom, a wife, and a working woman. How do I be honest with my partner about this topic and these feelings? Okay, I'm going to be very honest. This is a really layered question, and I think that what matters most is understanding what the fantasy actually represents. A lot of times, when someone starts thinking about an ex, it's not always about wanting the actual person back. Sometimes it's about feeling attached to who you were in that season of life. Maybe you felt more wanted, more pursued, maybe you felt attractive, more interesting, more desired. And that's the thing is when you are deeply rooted in the identity of being a mom, a wife, and working full time, that can be really complicated. Those parts of yourself that you desire, can feel very far away. So the deeper issue here is probably not, I want my ex. The deeper issue here is, I feel disconnected from myself, my partner, or the version of me that was desired and wanted in that season of my life. That is a very different conversation. And I think that's something that you're going to have to really decide. Do you miss your ex, or do you miss the version of you who you were in that season? And I think honesty always matters. I think it's the best policy. I think if you are, covering things up or lying, you're just digging a deeper hole, and you're going to have to find ways to cover it up. You're going to have to find ways to constantly be making up for every lie you tell. So I think honesty matters in relationships, but honesty should also be very thoughtful as well. The goal is not to create unnecessary damage or self-sabotage. The goal is to get underneath the feeling and talk about what's actually missing in that time. Maybe the conversation is, I've realized how disconnected I feel. I miss feeling desired. I want more spice in my relationship. I miss feeling like more than just a parent or a wife. I think that we need to rebuild our connection. That invites repair instead of just pain or sabotaging. Sometimes what actually feels like attraction to someone else is actually a signal that something in your current relationship or your relationship with yourself needs attention. If you catch yourself, for example, craving compliments or wanting compliments from people about your appearance, maybe there's an insecurity deep down within yourself. Maybe that's something that you are desiring that you're not getting in your own relationship. Or maybe that reassurance comes from a trauma response. Whatever it may be, that's a deeper look into what's really behind that feeling, and not just creating a self-sabotage moment in the relationship with either yourself or your partner. So I hope that answers your question. And moving on, question. I stopped texting first. My friend said I'm too much and she doesn't have time for me. What do? I don't want to lose the friendship. So this hits deep because friendship rejection can feel very personal. And I think this is one of those wounds that you have to really step back and not take things personal, even when it's really hard to do so. But if someone's telling you that you're too much, I think it's important to remember that sometimes people are not rejecting your worth. They're revealing their own limitations, their own emotional capacity, their own inability to meet you where you are. That does not mean that we should never reflect on ourselves. Reflection matters a lot. Growth matters. Accountability matters. But it does mean that you should not chase people who are making it clear that they do not have space for you, whether it's a season, whether it's forever. Not every relationship is meant to last forever. Some people in your life are there for a reason and a season, like I say. And some relationships end not because you were unworthy, but because they simply ran its course. So what do? I'm going to be really honest. Let it go. Stop chasing, stop forcing connection where there's no reciprocating that connection. And accept that sometimes peace comes from no longer trying to convince someone to hold you properly. It's hard, but it's healthy. What's your opinion on people talking behind your back, and how do you handle rumors that are not true? Listen, I've talked about this. I've had a couple episodes about this. People gossip for a lot of different reasons: insecurity, jealousy, projection, boredom, and unresolved trauma or pain. That does not excuse the behavior, but it explains a lot. One thing that I've learned in my many years of experiencing gossip and drama since I've moved to the city I'm in now is that if someone is willing to gossip with you, they are willing to gossip about you. So for me, I personally pay attention to that. I personally do not trust people who build connection or friendships by tearing other people down. As for rumors, I think it's one of the hardest lessons in life is teaching ourselves that not everything deserves a reaction and learning that too, because it takes patience and practice to learn. When someone is lying, twisting something, or talking behind your back, the instinct is to naturally defend yourself immediately. Correct every detail, fight to be understood, but often that reaction just gives more life to the drama. They're not even worth your time, and they don't care. And that's a hard truth to sit in. They don't care to know who you are because they're creating a false narrative. The older I get, the more I realize that sometimes the strongest thing that you can do in the moment is stay grounded and let people reveal themselves. People are going to gossip, people are going to talk. That does not mean that rumors don't hurt. That does not mean that your reputation does not matter. However, it means that not every fire deserves your oxygen. Some things are better handled with distance, discernment, and emotional restraint. Again, that's something that has to be learned, and it's very difficult. So, moving on to the next question that was sent in from someone I know. How do I exercise at home and stay motivated? Girl, I think this is one of the biggest mistakes people make with working out is making it too extreme and too fast, putting too much pressure on yourself to be perfect. If you want consistency, start realistically. Start with 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Start with a routine that fits your schedule, not this imaginary TikTok workout version of whatever society is pushing us to do right now. Not every workout has to feel intense or punishing. It doesn't have to make you drenched in sweat. Some days it can be strength training. Some days it can be stretching. Some days it can be going for a walk and getting fresh air, just moving your body enough to remind yourself that you showed up for that time. Motivation is great, but motivation is unreliable. I think that's going to catch people off guard. I have found in my past, and I'm getting back to working out since having my twins, but discipline is what carries you through when motivation disappears. So for me, the bigger question is not how do I stay motivated? It's how can I stay committed, or how do I stay committed? Tie it to your purpose. Are you wanting more energy, to feel stronger, to look better, to feel better mentally, to take care of your body because it deserves that? Purpose creates consistency, and consistency matters more than perfection or motivation. I also think that affirmations help more than people realize. Sometimes you need visible reminders. You can put things on your mirror, sticky notes, write lipstick, whatever. You can write things like, I am worth this effort. I do not need to be perfect. I just need to keep going. Showing up counts. Because I think the biggest truth that we can be reminded about is that progress is not built in huge moments. It's built in repeated ones. That's where that consistency, that discipline comes into play. You can start by running 10 minutes a day, and a month from now, you could be running an hour. So find your purpose and find what matters to you and go for it. This next question is something that I think we can all relate to as parents. I feel like a failure as a mom because I get really mad and lose my shit. What's your view on that? Okay. First, I do not think that you are a failure. Also, knowing you personally, I do not think you are a failure. That's for the person who wrote this question. I think a lot of mothers are carrying enormous guilt around the exact struggle, especially because many of us are trying to parent differently than what we were parented while also healing from what we grew up with. And that is a heavy assignment to have. To be completely transparent with you guys as listeners, I used to be a much more reactive person than what I wanted to be. And it's taken me a long time to get to a spot where I'm not doing that as much. I've had to work hard on that. And one thing I've learned is when parents do not know how to regulate themselves, they often end up placing their stress, anger, and frustration onto their children. And children remember things like that. They remember our tone, our reactions. They remember how they felt safe or unsafe, or how even we felt safe or unsafe. I feel like children are very intuitive. So I think that reminding ourselves to stop and pause before we react is something that every parent should be able to do, not because we are a failure, but because we don't want to be a failure. So no, I do not think you are failing because you struggle. I think the real question here is that whether you are willing to look at it honestly and work on your reaction. Healing is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. And I think that matters. Remind yourself that you want to raise children who feel safe around you. You want living room kids, not kids who feel emotionally pushed away all the time. For me, I want my children to know that they can come to me, be around me, and exist near me without constantly feeling like they are too much or in the way. Something that has helped me is to remind myself that that means I have to regulate myself too. I have to pause, I have to own when I get it wrong, and I have to break patterns instead of excusing them. The fact that you're asking this question already tells me that you care. And so, no, I think that you are far from a failure. I think, if anything, you are an amazing mother who wants to go above and beyond to love her children and raise them in a safe and loving environment. Moving on to the next question. Is there a trauma in your life that changed who you are? Yes. There are definitely things that I have lived through that have changed me deeply. One of the biggest things was being in an abusive relationship that became my first marriage. I've talked about this on my podcast, but I've also talked about it on another podcast, which actually led me into podcasting here. That experience changed my personality, my worldview, my sense of trust, the way I understood and dealt with pain. If you don't know already, I told my story publicly for the first time as a guest on another podcast, and that experience opened something in me, showed me that truth telling matters. Talking about the hard things matter. And the stories that you go through that you don't feel like talking about can actually help other people. If we are being completely honest, that relationship was the most painful thing I've ever went through in my life. Healing from it has been a long process. It's brought anger, grief, shame, and a lot of reckoning, and has honestly made my blood boil numerous times. But I know that if my story just helps one person leave a dangerous situation, helps them work through something, that it's all worth it, because sharing our stories and being honest is what changes the stigma, what changes the way that we see the world and the way that we deal with our own trauma. Moving on to this question about holistic thinking and standing in your own beliefs. You've talked a lot about holistic and functional approaches. How do you handle judgment from family and friends who don't understand? I think people tend to judge what they don't understand. And more than that, I think people often get uncomfortable when someone begins questioning systems, routines, or beliefs that they've never examined themselves. Or better yet, that we're told not to question at all. For me, the answer is simple. I ask questions, I do research, I think critically. I want to know what I'm agreeing to and what I'm consuming, what I'm being told, and what's making the most sense for what works for my family. That does not mean everyone will agree with me. That does not mean I need everyone's approval. But you cannot force people to educate themselves. You cannot force people to be open minded or question systems. You cannot force people to understand your convictions. All you can do is make informed decisions, keep learning, and stand confidently in what you believe is best for your family. I'll be sharing more about that, and I'll also be having people on the podcast about that to talk about that. But I've also made peace with the fact that not everyone's going to understand it. Not everyone's going to make changes. Not everyone's going to get it. Now, as we move into a little bit deeper questions, I'm going to talk more about these topics in different podcast episodes coming up. So I will answer these questions, but I do plan on discussing these more in depth in their own episodes. What does it actually mean to feel emotionally safe in a relationship or with someone? Well, emotional safety does not mean perfection. It does not mean there is never conflict, discomfort, disagreement, or hurt. It means that even in the hard moments, you're not afraid of what the other person will do with your vulnerability. It means that you can tell the truth without bracing for punishment. It means you can cry without being mocked. It means you can be honest without walking on eggshells. It means you can bring up pain without being called dramatic, crazy, too sensitive, or too difficult. And it means that your needs are not being treated like an inconvenience. Emotionally safe people do not make you feel small for having a heart. And I think one of the saddest parts is that many people do not even realize when they're being emotionally safe, or They're in those emotionally unsafe dynamics because chaos has felt so normal for people for so long that, as people who've been through trauma or we've lived in that chaos, we confuse unpredictability with passion. We confuse eggshells with love and emotional inconsistency with depth. Real emotional safety feels steady. It feels clear, like your inner world can exist in someone's presence without being minimized, dismissed, or weaponized. That matters in all relationships, family, friendships, romantic relationships. And so I think, being aware of the dynamics in the relationships that you have and assessing those dynamics and being able to even see if you're the toxic one that's emotionally unsafe and how you change that. This next question is a good one and I think all too common. At what point do you stop blaming your past and take accountability for your actions? I think that accountability begins in the moment you realize your past may explain you, but it cannot keep excusing you forever. There's a difference between understanding your wounds and using them to avoid responsibility, right? We can't say, hey, I'm like this because of this. It's not your fault what happened to you, but it is your responsibility to heal from it. Trauma absolutely affects the nervous system. It changes how people interpret threat, rejection, abandonment, or emotional pain. It can make people react faster, more intense, and more defensively. That is real. But accountability is the moment that you say, my triggers are real, my wounds are valid, and my reactions are my responsibility. The way that we respond to people, the way that we react to people is our job to it's our job to respond or react with emotional regulation. It is not their fault that you have trauma. It is not their fault that you have triggers. The world does not adapt to your needs. You have to learn to adapt to the world. By refusing to change or blaming your past, you are saying, this is just who I am or how I am. That's blaming and excusing. Accountability says, I understand why I became this way and I'm going to work on becoming different. It's not easy, it's painful. That's painful work to have to work on. Gosh, I don't like the way I just said that. That is painful to have to work on yourself because it requires you to change before you're ready, to regulate while still healing, to choose differently while being triggered. But that is where the real growth and the strength comes into play. You do not have to prove growth to everyone when everything is calm. You prove growth in the moment that you're activated and still choose to not become defensive or self destructive. I love this next question. How do you tell the difference between intuition and a trauma response? This is one of the most amazing questions that I think I've gotten ever because I think it's one of the most misunderstood questions, both because intuition and trauma can feel like a gut feeling. Both can feel immediate and convincing, but they do not come from the same place. Trauma responses are often urgent, reactive, intense, and fear based. They come from a nervous system that's trained to scan for danger. They say that something's wrong, you're not safe, whatever it may be. Intuition, however, feels different. It's quieter, steadier, clearer. It's not usually fueled by panic. It's grounded even when it's uncomfortable. Trauma says, this feels familiar, so it must be dangerous, while intuition says, something here does not align and I need to pay attention. One question that can help us is this feeling trying to protect me from something that's real in this moment or from something painful that feels familiar from the past? The truth with that is that sometimes you don't know right away. That's why having that emotional regulation matters, because clarity does not live in panic, it lives in regulation. One thing that I think gets overlooked is that self-awareness alone is not growth. A person can say, I know I'm angry, I know I shut down, I know I can be triggered. But if nothing changes in that moment of activation, that's not transformation, that's observation. Growth only happens when awareness turns into regulation, when your emotions rise and you pause instead of lashing out, when you feel hurt and choose to not become cruel, when you feel triggered and still ground yourself before speaking. That's where the real work begins. And I can say, as someone who's still working on that too, it is difficult, but it's necessary. We don't want to be the person that says, I'm not going to change. This is just who I am. The world has to accommodate to me. Because what you're really saying, and in that moment of saying, this is just who I am, you're not growing. You're not changing. You're not becoming better. You're just expecting the world to react and accommodate to you, even if it hurts other people. Okay, all of that was really heavy, but I want to shift gears for a minute and do something a little bit later. I thought it would be fun to answer some quick questions so listeners can get to know me outside of the heavier conversations. And these are questions I have gotten from people who don't know me, um, just wanting me to kind of introduce kind of who I am behind the podcast voice, I guess. Favorite comfort food. These are rapid fire questions, by the way. So, favorite comfort food, probably cabbage soup or sushi. Coffee or energy drink, depends on my mood. I'm either a blondie style coffee with espresso or an Alani type girl. Morning person or night owl? Definitely a night owl. I can stay up and not be tired in the morning. What's one thing you have to do every day? Shower. I have to shower every day. My favorite way to unwind after a stressful day, a workout or a hot shower. My favorite comfort TV show, easy. True Blood or Heart of Dixie. My favorite comfort movie, the Harry Potter series. I don't have one favorite movie. I love the Harry Potter series. I could watch that over and over and over again. I even have the floating candles for my ceiling. So, yeah, podcast or music. Usually podcasts or audiobooks are my favorite. Favorite season? Well, fall without a question. I got married in October on Halloween. September through early November is kind of my happy place. My moods are great during that time of year. Favorite kind of Friday night? Well, pajamas, showers, a relaxed night with the kids, something easy to eat, and everyone finally being able to unwind and stay up late and just be relaxed, you know. Yeah. What was high school like for you? Oh, okay. Honestly, I had a good experience in high school. I went to a smaller school. I don't really have any major complaints about that season of my life, but I spent a lot of time with friends, with my boyfriend at the time, and outside. I was outside whenever I could be. There's something about the place I grew up that honestly still feels really grounding to me. It's relaxing. Like when I go back there, the smell of it, the quiet of it, the overall energy is just really calming. And I still think about that all the time. Where I live now, I can't go walking or running wherever I want. And there's not really a lot of trails to do that. But back home, I can run along the riverside. I can run the streets of, across the river in Illinois. It's so relaxing. What did you go to college for? I went to college for more than one thing. I originally started in fire science and EMS, and I shifted into criminal justice and then eventually into social work and psychology is where I kind of landed. But I didn't do like criminal justice as a whole. I just took some classes out of that for my social work and psychology. I've always felt really deeply invested in people, patterns, behavior, obviously, because I'm talking about it on my podcast. But, you know, I think a lot of what I've gone through, even after college, has made my life like this purpose of wanting to help people and make it meaningful and lasting. And I'm always researching, I'm always learning more. And the younger version of me would have been shocked to see how much I've grown because I'm not glad for the pain, but I'm glad for the purpose that has came from it. Do you think you have a talent or gift that makes you unique? Oh, okay, yeah. I really have strong discernment. I'm very sensitive to energy shifts. I can usually tell when something's off in a room, whether it's a vibe, energy, whoever. When energy changes or when someone's carrying something really heavy, I'm an empath. So when the dynamic feels wrong or when somebody's going through something, I can absorb that energy and I have to be very careful about what I put my energy into because of that. So I think some people are naturally very tuned into emotional undercurrents, but I know that's very true for me. So I have to be very mindful of where I put my energy. What is the most important quality to you in a person? authenticity. Because I think when someone is authentic, a lot of other qualities tend to kind of shift with it: honesty, loyalty, accountability, trustworthiness, openness, and the ability to admit when you're wrong. A genuine person is easier to trust because you see what you get. What you see is what you get. And I think that matters more than anything, honestly, anything else, because if you're not genuine or honest, then what do you have and what are you? The last question is probably one of the best questions. What is one thing people need to learn to let go of that you've learned to let go of? Expectations. That's it. One word. More specifically, expectations that other people will behave exactly how we want them to. You cannot control other people. You cannot force maturity. You cannot force healing. You cannot force reciprocation. You cannot force understanding or empathy. The more tightly that you grip onto those expectations of others, the more disappointment that you create for yourself. And honestly, sometimes peace comes from learning to release what was never yours to control. That was probably the biggest lesson that I've had to learn throughout my entire life. Well, that was it. This wraps up the Q&A. I really enjoyed this because it had both depth and a little bit of lightness too. And I was able to kind of open up the floor to you guys. We talked about emotional safety, accountability, trauma responses, self awareness, healing, and intuition, and a little bit more about who I am outside of the heavier topics. At the end of the day, I'm still just a person figuring out life in real time. There's no agenda with this podcast. I'm not going to think or feel like I'm above anyone else. I'm not here pretending to have everything mastered. I'm here healing with you, alongside you, to help you kind of add those tools to your toolbox. And I am not here to judge anybody. We're all just trying to grow and learn, right? We're all trying to navigate life. I am trying to grow, protect my peace, and be a good mom, a good wife, keep my circle small, be a true friend, stay grounded, and have real conversations that matter. And that's what this entire podcast is platformed on. Is that's the foundation, is growing through the hard things and learning to be honest about who we are instead of hiding those parts that society tells us that we need to shame. So, thank you for listening and thank you for sending in your questions. And as always, thank you for trusting me. I have more topics coming. A lot of these questions were questions I pulled because these are topics that I'm going to be discussing on the podcast. We're going to be having more conversations, hopefully more guests this season. Life has been full of chaos lately, so I've been navigating these changes and kind of accommodating myself to that. But I'm still here, I'm still building. If anything, I'm just going to do some solo episodes for a while and just kind of add in the guest appearances where they are able. And yeah, stay tuned and I will see you later.